So what does it mean to be future ready? None of us have magic crystal balls that we can look into the future and predict what will happen. So we have to build our organizations and build our teams in order to be ready to adapt. And I think about this as, really creating complex adaptive systems that our teams and organizations at a DNA level are able to adapt quickly. And a beehive is an example of a living system. The bees are all working together towards a common goal, and the queen bee is not telling them what to do necessarily. Their DNA programming, their stimulus response is what's allowing them to work together to adapt and respond. And individuals in an organization often work the same way. They make their own choices on what they'll do every day, but those choices come through the adoption of mindsets and behaviors. And so what we are working on in my program is helping people to build these mindsets and behaviors that will allow them to be adaptive and responsive in the moment. Building teams that are future ready really involves skills like adaptability, agility, resilience, and having an experimentation mindset. We have to create safe environments where people can experiment and develop this resilience. And part of all of this, as I've said before, is navigating complexity and building complex responsive systems. I often think about this also as becoming a learning organization or building the characteristics of a learning organization. So we try to enable systems thinking, personal mastery, the development of strong mental models and shared visions, and then team learning, so learning as you go. And these are all things that we build into our training program at the Sprint Master Academy. Each of these Sprint Masters builds their own mastery and infuses into our product development process across the company this culture of experimentation and human-centered design. So back in March, when we all were faced with having to dramatically pivot and change the way that we work, we had to come together. We had many critical design sprints in flight. Product teams rely really heavily on our design sprint methodology as their way of working. But we also generally used to do that in person, and we're a global company and we would spend a lot of time flying around to work in person. But we had to figure out a new way to work. We had deep mastery of our design sprint framework and methodology. And as I mentioned, we've trained thousands of UXers and other roles at Google as well. And I have an engaged community of 400 expert sprint masters, people who have absorbed and built this skill set over time. But remote sprinting and working remotely like we are doing right now over this digital platform was really new to us. We had a couple people within the organization that were doing this type of work, but the majority of that core team of facilitators, sprint masters, human-centered design thinkers really relied on the in-person experience, the room that you could pull out your Post-its and your Sharpies and draw big journey maps on the walls. Without that context and that environment, we were all a little afloat. So the first thing that we did was to bring everyone together and to look to the organization, to look to the community of experts and have them share what they were doing, what they did know. So we created a platform to amplify and scale the learnings of the community as people are in the process of learning. So as they are adapting, finding new tools, developing new ways to facilitate virtually, we shared through this platform on a weekly basis. People would get together, share their learnings, and make everything available and accessible to others so that we could iterate quickly on new ways of working virtually. We knew we couldn't take our traditional multi-day design sprint and run it in the same format. I know you all have spent a long time on digital today on your team's platform, and it can be very draining and exhausting for people to spend 8 hours at a time on a video platform. So we looked at this full 3 or 4 day sprint that we might be running in person and explored what it might look like to break it down into smaller sessions. Also working across time zones. We are working, I'm in San Francisco, I work with people in Singapore, I work with people in London. It can be very hard to find a common time zone in between those. So we had to look at how do we adjust? How do we, combat this sort of video conference fatigue? And we found that it was about more than just distributing that time. It wasn't just hour per hour was the same, and I could take a 4-hour session that I might take in person and just translate it to the digital environment. Everything takes more time. You guys all work today interactively. Maybe you experienced some of the difference in the way it happens when you collaborate with a virtual canvas as opposed to in an actual room. So I've always thought about the design sprint framework as a container for a facilitator, a design thinker, to bring a team through a process to a very clear deliverable. And while we'll do a lot of advanced preparation and user research and reframing of the problem, before we get everyone into the room, that container really allows us a lot of flexibility to pivot as we're working to, pick a new direction if we need to, and to, as a facilitator, really focus on the problem solving. But in the virtual context, this was a little bit harder. It's very hard to pivot people's time, bring in new users at the last minute. So what we started thinking about, and the way we've sort of changed our thinking, is really thinking about this as atomizing the sprint, breaking it down to its component parts, and looking at much shorter sessions that we can run to get the outcomes that we need. And this feels a lot like more traditional design thinking, but has been something that's been really effective for teams. So we'll look very crisply at our goals, narrow in on exactly what do we need to take away from this session collaboratively or synchronously, and then set that goal for the session. Is it about building shared language? We'll use methods for specifically defining and building a shared understanding of terminology, or is it about building a unified vision of what this product should be together? And when we set that focus, we're able to design that session in a much more targeted way. We've also spent a lot of time getting our tech and our tools right so that our sessions go smoothly. As I said at the beginning of this, it's great to see technology that works. So much of the time we're troubleshooting in the moment and using time for that. Also building confidence as a facilitator. I believe all of you have probably been doing that over this summer too. Building confidence in that digital environment is really critical. And the piece that we used to take for granted very much, when we could get all of you in a room together, I could see your faces, I could get visual cues, body language. In the virtual environment, it's very hard for me to know, is this the topic that I'm covering right now interesting to you? Are you listening? These are all hard things in the virtual environment, and people have other things going on around them. Like, for example, I have construction going on outside my window right now. So being able to design an interactive session for engagement, for me to connect with people, for me to focus when there are things happening in the world around me. This actually takes a whole new set of skills that we didn't necessarily have before we were all, asked to work from home and convert to a remote context. So these are some of the new sort of adaptive skills that we've built and mindsets we've brought to running design sprint sessions at Google, and some examples of successes that people had this summer, for example, the cloud UX team really narrowed in on building specific empathy with their users. So empathy mapping with the cross-functional team, bringing in their engineers and your product managers, and they were able to identify better opportunities to improve their customer journey through empathy mapping. You're probably all very familiar with that methodology, but the cloud team, for example, created really good resources for us to do that in a virtual environment. We also have a playbook that we use pretty regularly across our products at Google called our Critical User Journey Playbook. And this is where we help our product teams to establish what is that most important user journey for our users that we want to design to, and understand where the most important moments are in that journey. And these sometimes cross the boundaries of products. So for example, I might be on Google Maps searching for a restaurant to go to, and then when I click on it, I might go into a search experience. And Google Maps and search are different products. They're different product teams. So we need to trace those user journeys across the different product teams and across those silos. So we were able to use our Critical User Journey Playbook and help the new Google Health team to define what that critical user journey was for them in terms of things like, potentially self-diagnosing if you have symptoms and need to know, do I need to go to a doctor? These kind of examples. We also saw good success with our Google for Education team. This was a really critical time for schools and educators to be using our Google Classroom tools and our other suite of products, the G Suite, so Gmail, Calendar, and the Google for Education team used the mapping assumptions method to understand, where were really these gaps in the experience now that educators were being moved into a remote environment, and how could we better serve the teaching needs and the needs of administrators as they were transitioning their programs into a remote environment. And we even had teams like our emerging markets team is developing new products for how to share and store photos on low tech devices. So they did long-term vision and roadmap setting over multiple days and timeframes with their teams across India, San Francisco, Boston, and they all were able to work together remotely with our new, more defined, shorter sessions. And we even used some of these tools to help create a stronger team culture and to help new teams form. In this time period, we've hired new people, we've onboarded and developed new teams, and we need to build a shared sense of mission and vision for those teams. And we've used things like Mural and the Golden Circle, Simon Sinek's Golden Circle, to bring the team together to have a conversation about what is our purpose as a team, what is our vision, and to have a little bit of fun together. So through this rapid iterative learning and building of new tools and new capacities, we've been able to keep our team sprinting with over 60% participating in a sprint during this time period. Many of us were concerned we were just going to have to wait, but when it comes to product development, as you guys all know, and solving really critical problems, we can't just sit back and wait. We have to find new ways to work and adapt. So we found that we were actually even had some benefits from being in this virtual environment, and maybe you've seen some of these yourself. We were able to get more engagement from our cross-functional partners, our engineering teams and our product management teams, because the tools that we have are more visual and more engaging and gave them an experience that was different from their day-to-day 30-minute meetings. We were able to increase inclusivity for quieter voices because the virtual environment creates more time and space for those voices. And my favorite part about this is that the sprint documents itself, and I'm not running around taking photographs of Post-its anymore. So we actually do have silver linings that have come from this. And Googlers are always active in contributing back to the community. We ran sprints with the California Public School System and the Google for Education team to help them, like I was saying, problem solve the transition of their learning programs into a distance learning format. We worked with the New York City's nonprofit organizations providing COVID support programs to people who are homeless or people who are looking for jobs, who found themselves jobless in this time period. And the health team did a specifically focused design sprint on how to create more equitable health programs to provide more access to people who need health care during this really challenging time. So our pivoting, our learning as we go has enabled us to not just keep working collaboratively, remotely across our different functions, but also to collaboratively work outside of the boundaries of Google. I want to thank the emoji team for these beautiful emojis. I always like to pull graphics from our own repository and say, you know, I'm very impressed with the work that I was seeing earlier today from all of you. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share our perspective from Google.
Thank you very much, Kay, for the reflection that you share with us.